Okay, I'm going to start. Thank you all for being here. This is a panel, Empowering Change, Women Leading AI in Anti-Corruption Efforts. I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Irene Tello Arista, co-chair of Action for Justice. Action for Justice is an organization dedicated itself to equip individuals and communities with practical legal knowledge to uphold their human rights and protect the environment through legal advocacy and legal action. But I'm also a researcher of corruption on the Central European University, analyzing how beneficial ownership information can be used for anti-corruption purposes. I got into these topics because I experienced firsthand what corruption does. Corruption kills, and this is not something that we say because it's like a cliche, it's because it actually happens. And because the best way to see the impacts that corruption has on the lives of many millions of people, myself and a couple of researchers in Mexico dedicated itself over 2.5 years to investigate how shell companies were being used all over the country to diversify public funds. What we found in the end was the evidence of 2,206 million euros being diversified using more than 22,000 fake invoices. But in the end, we only had the name of the fake companies and not of the people who benefited from them. That's why right now I'm analyzing how beneficial ownership information can be used to detect money laundering schemes that are transnational. When I'm doing this research, one of the parts of my investigation is to use machine learning algorithms to see if we can identify politically exposed companies using financial information to detect higher risk of corruption in public procurement processes. But then when I started actually programming these models and using the data to analyze machine learning experiences for anti-corruption purposes, I started facing firsthand the consequences and some of the questions that I think we want to abort in this workshop. So how to assess the quality of the data, how to match different data sets to detect recurrent patterns, what variables to choose to train the data sets, how to make sense of the outcome of black box algorithms, how to avoid bias from overrepresentation of more compliant companies, how to better train models on past data to perform on new data that may not present the same risk patterns, how to deal with data protection issues, how to develop ethical frameworks for organizations, governments, citizens, journalists, and companies, learn how to deal with all these issues. Like I said, these are the questions that were like the origin of this workshop. But the second thing that actually entitled us to do this workshop can be seen in this picture. I don't know if you recognize this. Does anyone know it? This is a 1956 Dartmouth summer research project on artificial intelligence. This was supposedly where the term artificial intelligence was coined. I don't know if you see something that strikes you in the picture. It's an all-male panel. And maybe many of you will tell me that this has had to do when this summer research had to do, that there were not many women involved in AI and technology issues. The thing is, if you follow AI things and topics closely, maybe you heard that last year, Sam Altman, the current CEO of OpenAI, was actually fired by the board and then was rehired by the board, but as a consequence, the only 2 women of the board of OpenAI were renounced. Now, again, OpenAI has women on the board, but I think in this area we can also see an underrepresentation of women, even though we are currently using and investigating these technologies, and definitely have some ideas on some of the ethical considerations that arise when using these technologies. So this is the questions that we want to see, like explain to you some of the cases that we have been using and researching ourselves, some of the advantages that these technologies pose, some of the ethical considerations and challenges that need to be considered, and some practical insights at the end in case you want to be involved in this fascinating new topic. So without further ado, I want to introduce our wonderful panelists today that we're going to explore these issues. So first I have Fernanda Odila. Fernanda has a PhD in social science and public policy and a master's in criminology and criminal justice from King's College London. She is currently a research fellow for the BEAT Act, the Bottom-Up Initiatives and Anti-Corruption Technologies project, funded by the ERC and conducted at the University of Bologna. She will be joining soon the Horizon Europe-funded project Respond. which focuses on new approaches for combating corruption and other undue influences on political decision-making. Prior to her academic career, she worked as a multimedia producer for the Brazilian desk at the BBC in London and as a reporter for daily newspapers in Brazil. She is the author of The Digitalization of Anticorruption in Brazil, and her research interests are control of corruption, accountability, and new technologies in the context of anti-corruption, integrity, and quality of government. Thank you, Fernanda. We also have Antonina Bolcotruv. She is a board member of Anti-Corruption Action Center, and she is the leading the analytical work of the organization. She is a trainer on financial data search and analysis with expertise in foreign registers and databases. Additionally, she is responsible for the ANTAC security. Ms. Volkotruv holds a master's degree in economics from the National University of Kyiv-Mohyla Academy and a Master of Science degree in data science from Ukrainian Catholic University. Thank you, Antonina. Okay. And we also have Carolina Gerlich, who is a PhD candidate in political and social sciences at the University of Bologna. She investigates the use of AI in public organizations to tackle public procurement corruption within the EU, with a focus on Italy, Germany, Estonia, and Cyprus. She previously worked on governmental digital transformation projects at PricewaterhouseCoopers, Italy. She holds a master's degree in economics and management of public administration from Bocconi University. Thank you so much, Carolina.
Thank you.
So now to start the panel, I want to ask the panelists the first question. So if you can talk us about some of the current uses of AI in anti-corruption that you are currently using or investigating, and what do you see as the main advantages of using these technologies in these case studies? So I pass it over to you, Fernanda.
I'm going to start, and I need my
I have
slides. Oh, cool. You can have it. So, can you hear me well? Yes. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. As Irene said, I started as a journalist, so my task was discovering the next week's scandal in Brazil. It's not that difficult, but the most difficult part was provoking a reaction from civil society, from especially law enforcement agencies and the government per se. Then I decided to do my PhD to reflect a bit on corruption and anti-corruption mainly. And most recently, I've been researching anti-corruption technologies. I'm part of a group that researches 9 countries. I research Brazil and Uruguay. But what called my attention is I've been interviewing CEOs, activists, journalists, developers, public officials. And Brazil strikes as a country that has been developing a lot of AI tools to fight corruption. And I'm going to take you to a trip in Brazil. I'm not going to talk about all the tools, but I map over 30 tools being developed by both civil society organizations, tech-savvy individuals, or the public administration. But what I want to call your attention with this picture here, you see how childish are most of the bots. And also, you can see over there is in Portuguese, but most of the bots have female names. We're going to talk a bit about that. But I think it's something to pay attention from the beginning. I want to talk about one case, Rosie, and an initiative called Operação Serenata de Amor, Operation Love Serenade. It was developed in 2016. It's been a while now. And what it does is, basically 3 friends, tech-savvy friends, they decided to create a bot that scrapes data from the lower chamber in Brazil, and specifically MP expenditures. And then they cross-check data, and they use the rules of the lower chamber. So, for example, politicians cannot pay meals for other people, just for themselves. They cannot drink alcoholic beverage. So this is very important, because this type of rules allows the developers to kind of say, beer, suspicious expenditure. 2 meals, suspicious expenditure. What they did was, they created a dashboard named Jarbas, in which all the suspicious expenditures are there. What happened to them? They started knocking doors. So it's a bot. It processes data really fast. So what happened is they discovered 2,000 of suspicious expenditures. They went to the lower chamber and say, hey, our bot discovered this. And basically the lower chamber said, we have no capacity to process everything. We are based on human beings. We are not that fast. Contact the politicians. They were ignored about the politicians. They knocked the prosecution service and the Court of Accounts. Basically, these two anti-corruption agents said, you know, you are discovering petty, cannot even say it's corruption, this misuse of money. If you are complaining about 2 burgers, the amount of money I'm going to spend to open a procedure is more than the amount of money that we are going to recover. Keep doing what you're doing. So they were so frustrated that they created a Twitter bot that tweets automatically. So they post a tweet, they used to, because then it's a sad story. I'm not going to tell the full story for you, but basically what happened was they decided to, every time the bot identify a suspicious expenditure, it would tweet automatically saying, hey, the member of the lower chamber X from state Y has this suspicious expenditure. Can you help me to check it? And they would link to the dashboard. I'm going to stop this story here because I want to tell you another story. That is the story of Sesam. This one was developed by the Revenue Service in Brazil. And basically the story is a civil servant doing a master's in AI. He decided to pass this formal exam and become a civil servant. He arrived in the port, a lot of paperwork. We're talking about the early 2000s. And basically, he said, I can't automate things here. The boss told him, no, thank you. But you need to stamp papers. He created the tool. They opened a procedure against him. He was investigated. He almost lost his job. But then over the years, the mentality changed. The government of Brazil started pushing innovation and creating innovation. Now he's the head of the innovation lab in the Revenue Service. And what you can see there, and I'm finishing now, is he created a tool that basically inspects import declarations, imports. And they analyze 30 different types of errors. And they identify false description of goods, missing licenses, preferential tax claims. But he was programming Java. That's what it's ugly, like that. But before ChatGPT, it already gave the inspectors a full report, already written using language processing techniques. So these are the 2 stories I want to tell. As you can see, I didn't mention any female by now, but next chapter I'm going to talk about it. Thank you.
Now, Antonina, if you want to tell a little bit more about what you're doing.
Yes, actually, thank you for having me here. Hello, everyone. My team works in Ukraine, and actually Ukraine was the first country who opened beneficial ownership register, and we have several attempts to use machine learning algorithms with analyzing beneficial ownership data. However, today I want to tell you about another our project. It was politically exposed person dataset creation. We heard in previous discussions a lot that PEPs databases are very important. However, Ukrainian PEPs also submit as declarations. Therefore, we decided to provide information, not only name all PEPs as PEPs, but also provide their declaration analysis and risk factor creation. Indicator creation. This mechanism will be used also not only for PEPs, but also for analyzing declarations for all candidates who want to be selected on some public positions, just to fasten our work. So actually, if you talk about usage of machine learning algorithm in all anti-corruption stuff, we can say that we have a lot of positive consequences. First of all, it's save data, save time for researchers. Because, for instance, if you have 7 declarations, like for 7 years about one PEP, you need to spend at least an hour to check all the declaration and try to summarize and to provide some consequences. If you use some machine learning tools, you just open a file and you can see some red flags, you can see some indicators and some comparison. So you don't need to spend this hour and this time. Additionally, computers are never boring, are never tired, so they can calculate everything and very, very precisely and accurate. Because when you have a lot of people to monitor, to analyze, you become tired and you can make some mistakes. In this case, in accuracy stuff, computers much more accurate. Moreover, when you use some algorithms and machine pattern recognitions, machine learning algorithm can identify some patterns which can be missed by human eye, because you cannot analyze very, very fast, like thousands of data, and to see some trends. When you use machine learning, you can see and you can provide some analysis. However, all this required very well-structured data. It will be one was the biggest challenge, which we will develop further. But in our case, we were a lucky one because in Ukraine we have really good, well-structured data about asset declarations, and they can be used for machine learning analysis. For some challenges with what we faced, we will talk about later. But I pass my floor further.
Thank you so much, Antonina. And I just want to say that I'm working currently with Antonina and Professor Mihai Fashekas, actually using beneficial ownership data sets to create risk indicators of ownership and validating them with corruption risk indicators in public procurement, which I think is also a very interesting use of AI and data for anti-corruption purposes that maybe later in the questions we can talk a little bit more. But maybe, Carolina, you can tell us now about what is being used by the government on AI for anti-corruption purposes.
Thank you, Irene. It's a pleasure to be here. So as Irene anticipated, my doctoral research is about how public organizations use and experiment with AI in anti-corruption with a focus on public procurement. I conduct interviews with people in public organizations, developers, businesses in Italy, Germany, Estonia, and Cyprus. So I will share with you 2 applications that I think are interesting for further reflections about AI in public procurement in Italy to tackle corruption. So in general, I would say that public organizations have a very high interest in experimenting with AI in public procurement to enhance transparency and accountability, and to use these tools throughout all the process of public procurement to support public officials, from using, for example, a large language model in writing tenders, to use AI to support the evaluation of bids, and to support the monitoring of contracts execution. The 2 cases that I will mention, the first one is about a contracting entity in Italy that is using NLP to basically standardize the product specifications in order to write more neutral tenders that do not favor any particular bidders. And I think this is very interesting. Another application instead is under development by the Central Purchasing Authority in Italy, and it's based on the use of AI to predict awarding behaviors of contracting authorities. So basically, the algorithm predicts the probability of winning for certain bidders in relation to certain contracting entities. Both these applications are outsourced to private sector companies, And both these applications are under development and will be implemented soon. So we still don't know about the changes taking place. But they both have benefits, I would say. First of all, they increase the overall transparency and accountability throughout the public procurement process. But they are also based on public procurement data. They're based on public past tenders and open public procurement data, but also like the list of products that are open to the national ministry website. So in terms of data protection, they show let's say a considerable less risk compared to others. And at the same time, also over the interviews, public managers of these applications underline that the use of these tools will be auxiliary. So they will be a support for public servants in performing the procurement process. And regarding the challenges, as my other panelists say, let's keep it for later.
Thank you so much, Caronila. When I decided to design this workshop, I wanted to have like a varied approach to AI uses because, like you know, this use of technologies for anti-corruption purposes can be developed and used by government, civil society, citizens, journalists, but also corporations for compliance issues. She couldn't be with us today, but I'm going to also present Ornella Belfiori. She's a lawyer, a white-collar crime investigations and compliance and DLA Piper. And Ornella received her GAD from Luis Guido Carli University and her Executive Master in International Sanctions and Trade Compliance from the Italian Compliance Association. I'm going to show you a video of Ornella because she has been studying the use of AI for anti-corruption purposes on compliance issues, and this is going to be a recorded video.
First of all, just let me briefly thank you, Transparency International, Irene, and the other co-panelists for having me here today. It is really an honor for me. Being a white-collar crime investigations and compliance lawyer at an international law firm, I mainly witnessed the use of AI as an ally, let's say, in compliance matters, and especially for anti-corruption for our clients. Plus, I have recently completed a master at the excellent International Anti-Corruption Academy in Vienna. And in my master thesis, I precisely explored how and to what extent AI-based tool can be effective for anti-corruption purposes in a corporate context. As further developed in my research, there are many reasons why companies may want to employ AI to this aim. First of all, corporate corruption is a phenomenon that is constantly increasing. Companies, especially when they are multinationals, are facing increasing pressure by regulators, and some of them, such as, for instance, the SEC, are already using AI, so this adds, of course, further pressure on them. Companies have to cope with several standards, regulations, laws, not only in the bribery space. And also corporate criminal liability is a potential consequence in some juridical system for certain type of violations. So this may also put the existence itself of the company at stake. So it is not surprising that companies decided to rely on technology as an ally for anti-corruption matters. They started using data analytics already some years ago, but data analytics does not seem to be sufficient according to recent data. Why? Because AI actually has some substantial advantages. First of all, because AI and machine learning in particular has autonomous learning capabilities, so it improves as long as as you use it, also in detecting bribery. Second, machine learning and neural networks may also use for a predictive analysis of bribery, whereas data analytics could only be used to look at data retrospectively. In my research, I found that you will find my thesis in the material, so you can take a look at that. I found that actually the use of AI for anti-corruption purposes should be decided by companies only after a thorough cost-benefit analysis. But some of the main aspects that clients, companies usually look at are increased efficiency, effectiveness, and reduction of time and costs. These are some of the main considerations that they take into account. As for my personal experience, I can say I work with some AI tools. In the past, I have had a very positive experience using Ascension, which is a tool that our firm DLA developed to identify bribery risks in business. And this is a tool that employs several AI techniques. It recognizes emotions, it recognizes changes in communications and behaviors. So we have used it to conduct due diligence, compliance reviews, audits, and especially, and this is one of my main areas of expertise, internal investigation. So we use the tool to substitute the human review for the first level review in internal investigation. So basically we launch the tool identifies some relevant documents, and then humans, lawyers, review the output of the tool. So we ensure that are always humans that make the decisions, which is very, very important also from an ethical perspective, as we will see later on. So for instance, we use it with a company active in the real estate sector very recently, and the tool extracted like more or less 500 documents that were relevant, and 25 of them contain red flags of bribery. To conduct the whole review, we employed like more or less 70 hours. To conduct it manually with humans at all stages of the process, it would have taken like 9,000 hours and more, we estimated. So the client was very happy with it, of course. With respect to gender imbalance, I can say that the data that I read in the Global Gender Gap Report are quite alarming. So we will come back to this point, but I really think we have to do more. I can see some positive trends. In the latest investigations I have conducting, I have seen more data scientists, more AI project managers that are women, but definitely we have to do more to this aim. Thank you.
And I think from what we have heard on this first round, I think it's an exciting time to be in anti-corruption efforts using AI. At least personally, when I'm training the methods and the models to actually detect which variables, financial variables, can detect politically exposed companies, I feel a rush of adrenaline of what we can actually do, because like I mentioned you before, doing this kind of investigation by hand takes a lot of time. You have to file thousands of FOIA requests, then you have to get that information into databases to start analyzing the investigation. And I wouldn't say that we're going to replace that, because I think it's extremely important that we incorporate these technologies for new investigations, for the process that we have been doing for a lot of time, but it definitely saves and helps us detect patterns on the data. But of course, when I started modeling these machine learning algorithms, I detected how my own biases got into the models. I decided which variables to put, and there are also ethical considerations that arise with these models. For example, now that I'm seeing which financial variables can be used for detect politically exposed companies, should we make this information publicly available when we know that corruption networks adapt their behaviors to constantly be compliant with new transparency policies and still have the corruption schemes in place? Like, I think it is an exciting time to be doing this, but I think we also have to be cautious and talk about the challenges and the ethical considerations that arise from using these technologies. So this is what I want to ask to you right now. What do you see as the main challenges of using these technologies for AI, and what are the main ethical considerations that we have to take into consideration when using artificial intelligence for anti-corruption purposes? I don't know, Fernanda, if you can start.
I can, yes, of course. Um, I'm going back to Rosie case because I think it's very telling. And just to know, I don't know if you're old like me, but Rosie was inspired by the Jetsons cartoon, The Cleaner, and that's why they named the bot Rosie. And one thing that, first, from the civil society perspective, they struggle a lot with the decision to name and shame the politicians on Twitter. They didn't want that. It wasn't the first option, but as I said, it was a challenge, convince the authorities. But I think the main challenge I see was technology is not enough. You need humans. You need humans thinking about it. You need humans using it. Because then, on Twitter, they faced a second challenge that is Rosie was blocked because Rosie is a bot. They didn't want to put their faces, so they created an account for the bot. And there is this challenge for civil society that you need this infrastructure, you need different types of technology, and sometimes you depend on the existing platforms, their rules, their logic, but it's the only way you can get visibility. In terms of ethical challenges, I'm going to talk about other challenges first, and then I go to the ethics, but really quick. Rose is also very telling regarding sustainability. As I told you, first, three friends, male friends, they had the idea. They launched a crowdfunding, a very successful crowdfunding, and they managed to hire one woman, one black woman. And they were aware that it was very important to have diversity in the team, to have to choose the variables, to look at the information in different ways. Another challenge that they faced was getting access to the data and knowing the rules. Remember I mentioned to you that alcoholic beverage and buying meals, this was very important. The Senate of Brazil, it doesn't have these rules. So they could not train the algorithm to detect suspicious expenditures because in the Senate is a fixed amount. You can spend the money as you wish with no rules. So this is very important. This is a challenge because we need clear rules to tell the computer what is 0, what is 1, and basically what is suspicious or not. Funding is another issue. Long story short, the three developers, they create these, they manage to have thousands of followers on Twitter, 600 people on a Telegram group exchanging ideas, discussing the codes, discussing the things. But in the end, they couldn't survive from that. They decided to transfer Rosie to Open Knowledge Brazil. Rose is still there, but it's just part of the portfolio. It's not treated as a priority anymore. Ethical challenges. One thing that I've been seeing a lot is risk scores. Technology is not exactly like this. And do I have 3 minutes? I'm going to tell a story about a tool from Brazil that score your risk of being corrupt. It was developed within the public administration. It's a very secretive tool. Every time you read about AI in Brazil, you see people giving this example, but no one had the opportunity to dig in. And basically what they did, they trained the algorithm based on civil servants in the federal level who were fired for corruption. So it's a very small number a sample is small, and they didn't consider a lot of variables, such as gender, age, and also, they didn't consider the time working as civil servant. Basically, what I realize is we do not have a lot of oversight over these tools. And this is something that I think civil society organization needs to start doing right now. It's super cool creating tools, but sometimes it's hard to convince people to use them. But more important is kind of looking at what has been done, especially in the public administration. So control this, hold them accountable, super challenging because codes are not that open. Probably you need a non-disclosure agreement, but I think it's about time that us, journalists, academics, activists, start looking in this black box, because otherwise it's going to be too late.
Thanks so much, Fernanda. And Antonina, if you also can speak a little bit about the challenges and ethical considerations that have come from your use of AI for anti-corruption.
Yes, technically, when we use machine learning algorithms, we work with data. When we talk about anti-corruption data, like we work usually with very asymmetric data. So we try to catch some outliers. And here is the trick. As Fernando mentioned, that we usually have some small samples because there are not so much data about in anti-corruption. So we cannot use like very fancy models like neural nets. We have to use a little bit simpler model. And these simpler models, they usually ignore all this low frequency data, and it's really hard to catch these outliers because they define them as very unimportant. The second moment, and very important moment, that when we collect the data, we need to check the quality of this data. Okay, we have the option when we collect it from state registers, or governments provide lists like in machine-readable format. It's the best variant. In case when it's impossible to do this, we try to use some secondary, second-hand, let's say, data. And here is the question about quality and fullness of this data, because we cannot check and we cannot control this fact. And when we talk about data, we also, we train some models which are going to predict something. We can face with the problems of trend dependencies. When, okay, we take some historical data, we train some model, everything works okay, but it doesn't relate to the future, because future has changed and your model just provide some historical information and not ready to predict something in the future. But here we talk about data which we put into the model, but the biggest challenge for NGO activists and for civil society, if we collect the data, and in our case it was about politically exposed persons, it's sensitive personal data and the questions about security. I'm from Ukraine, and I'm talking about PEP or HUA, which right now is closed because of security issues. Because of the war with Russia, we believe that our database can harm people who just physically is on temporary occupied territories. So you have to take into account that when you collect the data, you have to store it safely, and you have to think about possible damage this data and your models can provide to the people about whom you're talking about. And we also face this ethical challenge because we say about risky factors. And when we talk about riskiness, Iran also mentioned about that we personally choose these red flags which we want to use in order to train the data. So we have our personal bias. But even if all this risk factor works, it doesn't mean that we say, like, okay, this person is corrupt and try to mark all red flags and all negative, all negative facts about this person. We can say about some possibility to have some violation of legislation, but we cannot blame the person and mark his or her as corrupt. So when we talking about AI and usually usage and algorithms which are used for anti-corruption and machine learning algorithms, we're talking about classification. But in case of anti-corruption, I think it's better to use some regression models when you provide some possibility, some percentage of riskiness, and not to blame like directly, okay, this person is correct. So to sum up, you have to collect the data and clearly understand that this data is proper and it's enough to build something. You have to secure the data, and then you try to decrease your personal biasness when you train this model. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Antonina. And yeah, just to put into perspective what kinds of data we're using and the amount of data we're using. Right now, I'm training a model on Bulgaria. I have over 4 million observations on companies in Bulgaria from 2015 to 2019. I have 2011 variables. And like Antonina said, we have to analyze the quality of the data because this is the data that is used to train the models. But also, and this happens a lot with anti-corruption issues and AI, the samples of the companies that have irregularities that could be detected as corrupt, it's minimum compared to the normal companies. So we always have an underrepresentation of the cases that we're more interested. This also happens for fraud things. So in the end, we have to balance the data sets so they can see which kind of financial variables they need to train on. But this also, balancing of the data sets, becomes a new bias. Because in the end, it's not the original sample, but what we decide to train on the algorithm so they can detect the irregularities, the red flags that we're asking. And then when we have new data sets, we're only analyzing the samples, like Antonina said, from past behaviors. If these corrupt networks decide to adapt their behavior so we have new data that doesn't rely on these new risk factors, it's going to pass undetected. So these are some of the ethical challenges that come. Also, I think we have to start considering about companies that are actually transparent, and then we're actually criticizing and putting more the burden on companies that are actually complying with these transparency regulations, when many companies are not actually reporting their beneficial ownerships, and we have to know what to do with this missing data, which is extremely important for our cases. So just to give you a sense of all of the ethical challenges that come when NGOs and academics use AI for anti-corruption purposes. And now I want to pass to Carolina so she can explain to us some of the challenges and ethical considerations she has been investigating on how governments use AI for anti-corruption.
So yes, unlike Antonina and Irene, I'm not an AI developer, but I'm very interested in the process by which public authorities adopt or experiment with AI. So I would mention some of the challenges they encounter. So regarding the two applications that I mentioned earlier in public procurement, actually the public authorities encounter challenges in, first of all, integrating the AI system within the overall IT ecosystem of the public organization in terms of interoperability and so on, which is something that authorities struggle a lot usually. And the second one was the scarce knowledge of AI, so the difficulty in interpreting AI results. But actually, what's interesting is that interviewees, when talking about these challenges and applications, they manage somehow to cope with them, especially thanks to their previous experience with AI. Instead, this is not always the case with public organizations. So I would mention that above all, two challenges are serious roadblocks to AI adoption and experimentation, and one, Fernanda already mentioned it, is financial availability, and the second one is expertise. Financial availability, I would mention two examples from within the EU. In one case, one public authority, an anti-corruption authority, actually participated to the co-design and development of an AI tool, but in the end ended up not using it because it didn't have the financial resources to cover for the access to a private database containing the data about companies on which the AI tool is based. And this, of course, undermined the adoption of the tool. In another case, law enforcement authority, but also the Ministry of Justice, started experimenting thanks to EU funds coming from the Recovery and Resilience Facility. Therefore, I guess that these EU funds, after COVID, the pandemic, significantly boosted experimentation of AI tools in public organizations, also in anti-corruption, but at the same time, they pose a threat in terms of sustainability of these applications. what happens when these funds are over. And that's why public organizations really need to allocate ordinary budgets to them. And then expertise, because public organizations, and this is, I guess, a common issue probably all around the world, significantly lack personnel sometimes, and significantly lack technical expertise, data scientists. And the few technical IT public servants they have sometimes is definitely misallocated, so data scientists repairing printers or things like that. So that's why public organizations often end up relying heavily on outsourcing, and this, of course, as you can imagine, can create issues. Regarding the ethical consideration, my main ethical consideration is that while conducting my research and interviewing public authorities across different countries, it was really difficult for me to even assess the ethical aspect of these applications. Because gathering data about these tools from public authorities is very complex, very difficult. Information are very fragmented, as Fernando already mentioned. They are, and sometimes public authorities are not willing to disclose them. So it's a very sensitive activity. And it quite often is very difficult to really go into the details of the elements that would enable an ethical assessment. The only case where I was able to, was, and the only case where the public authority was really open to what happened over the AI experimentation was in Estonia. An authority tried to experiment an AI tool that basically match information from political campaigns on social media sponsored by certain individuals within companies or companies themselves, and match them with the public contracts awarded by these companies and the political campaign in favor of public authorities, of this public authority. So basically the AI tool was supposed to detect collusion between these companies and the public authorities. But the National Audit Office was very open about the fact that the experimentation failed because they were banned from Meta, from scraping data on their social media. And they were very open about the fact that it's very difficult, first of all, to define what a political campaign, a political advertising is on social media. And also, I guess there is a matter also of a trade-off between the public interest of an audit authority to investigate the misuse of public funds and the private interest of citizens and you know, that put their data on social media. So they were very open about that, but this is not always the case, unfortunately.
Thanks so much, Carolina. And I'm going to pass to the second question, but Ornella also mentioned one of the complicated and ethical considerations that arise on compliance issues using this data for compliance issues. I'm going to quickly put the video of that, and then I'm going to pass to the practical insights, because I think it's important also to know how law firms and companies are using AI for anti-corruption purposes and the ethical considerations that arise from the use of these technologies in that sector.
As also highlighted in my research, there are many challenges for using AI in a corporate context for anti-corruption purposes. First of all, the reliability of the data and the availability of those reliable data to train the AI. Someone said that data lies at the heart of the AI, and I really think this is true, because when data of inconsistent quality are used to train the AI, the output of the AI is seriously impaired. And it should also be considered that the AI should be periodically updated, retrained with new judicial cases, with new bribery patterns. So if we don't do this, of course, the AI won't be able to recognize those. So this is very pivotal. Companies, especially the smallest ones, are really in trouble in this. So they encounter many obstacles in this respect. So there are no open access data sets, and companies may be obliged to rely on their own internal data, which however may be incomplete. So those data may not contain the same type, the same bribery behaviors patterns that the companies may want to identify through the AI-based tools. And this is, of course, a problem because the output of the tool won't be reliable in this case. With respect to the main ethical considerations, ethical issues are one of the main themes, as I also explored in my thesis. With respect to this use of the AI for anti-corruption purposes in companies. Ethical risks include the unethical use of the AI, and most notably the lack of a human-in-the-loop requirement, bias, and discrimination. And my research suggests that those biases that result in a discriminatory output of the tool based on gender, race, ethnic origins, particularly hinders the effectiveness of the AI when used for anti-corruption purposes. So bias indeed was identified by many respondents to my survey and many interviewees as one of the main concerns that they have with respect to the deployment of the AI. And this is, in my view, really linked to the concept of gender inclusion, because gender bias in AI can occur at very different stages when we develop the AI, when the AI is trained, when the AI takes decisions. So if the data set is biased, such bias can be replicated by the tool so that also the output of the tool is contaminated, let's say, by this bias. So there have been cases where algorithms have been proved ineffective, unfair, biased, because, for instance, in the recruitment process, they preferred male candidates to female candidates just because for the training of the tool, a sample or data sample in which women were underrepresented had been used. So this must not happen simply in a realm such as anti-corruption, where fundamental rights are at stake. So what if an AI-based tool necessarily concludes, for instance, that women are more corrupt than men, while actually research appears to point in the opposite direction? Thank you.
So we have mentioned some of the challenges and the ethical considerations, but I think some of the other things that need to be addressed are the environmental impact that these technologies have. I think that you have heard about the amount of energy that it's needed to train these models, to keep the servers that are constantly feeding the data sets. So this is one of the considerations that I think it's also needed to be put. The amount of resources that it takes to actually build and train large language models. I think what we're going to start seeing more and more is this inequality where we researchers, journalists, NGOs, governments have access to outsource the technologies that are being developed by others. In the moment we use these technologies, then what is going to happen is that we lose the sense of the data and what is actually happening in the data sets. I don't know if you know, but every time you put something on ChatGPT, it becomes part of the data that it's being trained for the model. Imagine if we put this kind of data that it has sensible information on anti-corruption issues to train the model that we don't know what would happen next. So I think this is also something that needs to be considered. Not only the bias and the ethical considerations, but like I told you, I think it's a fascinating time to be in these fields. I have spoken to a lot of people, from programmers, developers, journalists, NGOs that are using these technologies. And what I've come to is that I think we're starting to see a sense of bipolarization, a polarization of these issues. When you speak with developers and people that are developing these technologies, sometimes they tell you that the technologies are developing so fastly that we cannot develop ethical frameworks for these technologies, that we need to let the technologies develop themselves their ethical considerations, which I think many of us would agree that is something unacceptable. And sometimes where people actually don't know what could actually be done with this, we start feeling fear of people that don't know what actually could come out of the use of these technologies for anti-corruption efforts. I think the purpose of this workshop was to try to create a bridge between these two visions. I mean, we have to be extremely cautious, definitely, but we also have to be excited of the opportunities that these technologies pose for anti-corruption efforts. But the only way to do so is to have a balanced discussion of what is actually being done, what could go wrong, and what is actually being used right. So now I'm going to pass to the last part of this workshop, because I also want to have a space for questions from you, to ask each of you if you can give us practical insights on how to actually use AI for anti-corruption purpose in an effective way.
So let's go. Brazil is a very interesting case because we've been seeing in-house development. So there is outsourcing, but most of the CEOs, they are developing their own tools. Civil society organizations, they have, so one thing that I would like to say, there are a lot of tech-savvy individuals who want to use their knowledge to create something interesting. And you need to kind of capture these people, and they are willing to volunteer, because most of the times it's good for their GitHub or the CV on the computer in the tech environment. So they want to do things, they want to try things. One thing that is happening, there are some schools of data that they offer courses, Python for collective action, Python for activism, grassroots actions, and I've been seeing this training happening, teaching techniques, and women, black people, gay people, everyone being kind of used to teach and to learn. So this is, I think, one thing that is already happening, could gain scale, could be replicated, but I think we have there. In the case of Brazil also, we have in-house solutions in the public administration. And this, as I told you the story of the guy who tried to create a tool, almost lost his job, and then he became the head of an innovation lab. So there was a change in mentality, and what I've been seeing is civil servants doing masters, doing PhD, and developing their tools during these courses. And then they started competitions for innovation. So this is something that we can join forces. We can kind of convince authorities to create competitions, awards, to innovate, co-joint events, and co-creation. I think we are arriving in a moment that we need to co-create. And this is something that we need to do. And final thought, we need to think about the users as well, because of course, access to data is complicated. The development is crucial, and if you have a kind of a diverse team, thinking, selecting, problematizing is important. But you can misuse the outcomes of these tools, the outputs of these tools. Imagine, Rosie, I can get one post on Twitter and use against my political opponent, for example. And so we need to reflect about what kind of use we do with sometimes problematic outputs.
Thanks so much, Fernanda. Antonina, if you want to tell us practical insights?
Yes, I actually jump here and to cut some very active people. We did this once, and I hope we don't have here any prosecutors, because when we try to train risky models, and this activist tell us, okay, you should select someone very risky, and based on their asset declarations, we will train and predict other risky declarations. And we select prosecutors, because a few years ago, general prosecutor officers and some members of this office was very, very corrupt and very risky in our mind. And what we received at the output that even really clear, ideal asset declaration was identified as risky, because that declaration connected to the prosecutor. Here, we need to collect people who know data science, but domain knowledge take place, and it's crucially important to combine these two together. So not to underestimate domain knowledge, because you can train the model, and the model can provide some prediction, and these predictions won't be fair. You need clearly understand what you want to have on the output. And data scientists, what they usually do, they try to use some fancy models, what they have, like neural nets or something very difficult, just to have really good accuracy, like high accuracy, and to put this model as a result. However, when we use very difficult models, it's like a black box. You cannot explain how this model predicts that this person has some corruption risk and this person doesn't have. And if you provide this algorithm like publicly, believe me, it takes 10 minutes, then person whom you marked as with high risk will call you and ask why. You have to explain like your logic, your algorithm, and what risk factors was used in order to clear, like to show that this person has some risk in his or her asset declaration. So in this point, I want to say that domain knowledge matters first. The second, not to run for the highest accuracy. You have to clearly understood how this algorithm works and how this risk factors are just calculated. And the last point, maybe one of the most important, we usually in data science say that baggage in, baggage out. So you have to work with data quality. And here it's not only data cleaning, data matching, and provide all this stuff like as clean as possible, but it's also data advocacy. We need to push governments to provide data publicly available in machine learning format and in good quality. For instance, in this case, what Irene mentioned, we had both sides. We tried to match beneficial ownership data with procurement data. And in Ukraine, for instance, we have quite high matching rate because Prozoro provides really high quality data. And we have all companies' IDs, and we can, when we match, we have really good, and we trust this data set. Because we believe that we don't make a lot of mistakes like in mismatching some companies. So data advocacy actually is not related to AI, but it's one of the most important sides, because you need to understand with what data you work and the quality of this data. And just to show that this data can be provided not only with your local governments, but also abroad. And you can match this data and to see whether the quality of your local data is the same as the quality for someone outside. Thank you.
Thanks, Antonina. Carolina, practical insights?
So practical insights, especially for public administration. First, as I said earlier, the public sector should allocate ordinary budgets to these AI experimentations and maybe create ad hoc organizational structures. So these structures could assess in a more systematic way the ethical issues and ensure maybe inclusivity and so on. And then second, public organizations should also find innovative ways to recruit data scientists, for example, by, as Fernanda said, upskilling existing IT public servants to ensure multidisciplinarity. Multidisciplinarity is essential to run these projects smoothly and also assess all the possible issues that might be encountered. And this also pertains to the inclusivity of AI developers, because of the many AI developers that I interviewed, just a couple of them were women. And I guess that the gender imbalance is probably still an issue in the development of AI, and maybe it's a reflection of the gender imbalance in STEM. And so definitely, while the use of AI, I guess that the gender balance depends on the type of public organization, but regarding the developers, more multidisciplinarity and inclusivity should be ensured. And last but not least, regarding one of the applications that I mentioned earlier, managed by 2 female managers, but developed by male developers. One of them actually struggled with her male boss in order to follow a gradual approach, because he wanted to start using AI out of scratch to write templates of tenders, while instead she insisted on following a gradual approach and start, learning by doing, experimenting a little bit and automating a little piece of that, and then achieving the ultimate goal. So I guess that one key in takeaway would be to not being in a rush. And I guess this is, it's an issue, especially in governments, because they feel this rush. They know they have to do something with AI, but they don't know how to do it or what type of AI application they want to achieve. And this, of course, might generate significant social, ethical issues. So following a gradual approach and approach AI in a more responsible manner without feeling this rush due to the hype.
Thanks so much, Carolina. And maybe I'll just close with some of the considerations and practical insights that I have developed. I think right now it's super important to have multidisciplinary teams look, research, and apply these technologies. Like, we need lawyers, we need journalists, we need people that know data scientists, people, even philosophers that go into the ethical considerations of this. And we have to find spaces to communicate, even though we come from different disciplines. I think this is going to be the most challenging aspect, because sometimes people that come from data science don't want to, or don't easily talk with people that don't understand the programming that comes into these technologies, which I think is something that we have to overcome, because in the end, these technologies are completely fascinating, but they're also a serious, something to be concerned about. The rate about why they're developing is exponential, so we definitely need to start speaking about this, which is why now I want to speak with you. Like, we want to hear from you. What are your questions? If you have heard or applied yourself AI for anti-corruption purposes. So we open the floor for any questions that any one of you may have.
Please don't be shy.
Any questions or experiences that you have also in your organizations, in your institutions, used AI for anti-corruption purposes?
Thank you.
For a really interesting conversation. My name is Chris McBurty. I'm from UNDP, Vietnam. Could you give us some advice on how, obviously from an ethical perspective and a transparency perspective, there should be some, as you mentioned, transparency over how these algorithms are created, how these decisions are made, and so on. How do you balance that with the real risk, as you mentioned, of corrupt actors learning from that and changing their practices? And then as ethical frameworks are developed and governance frameworks, how in this unique situation of using AI for anti-corruption do you balance both of those issues to actually get the real benefit from AI in this space? Thank you.
Anyone wants to start?
I can start. I was assessing 3 different types of tool recently. One is this risk score for being corrupt. Another one was a risk score for being a strong candidate that was framing female black woman. And the third one was a risk score for public procurement that was targeting more likely people who received social benefits in the past or had recently opening companies. And I faced ethical challenges because I talked to the developers. I had access to not everything, but the early versions of these tools. And I knew I couldn't open everything because otherwise people who engage in corruption would know all the audit trails, would know all the paths to circumvent it. You're absolutely right. So I think one way to do that is with non-disclosure agreements. So you have a committee, externals, but are allowed to evaluate, to test, to run. There are some softwares right now that you can run for check bias. You can kind of audit, but without disclosing everything. I think it's the only way because, of course, I don't expect that the codes of certain tools are on GitHub open for everyone. And this is one way to face it, but you're right, it's a challenge. It's a challenge even to write about it.
Actually, I can add that usually when corrupt people see these risk factors which we use, they try to change their behavior. You know, they always try to change their behavior. You don't need to put them as a risk factors to your model. It's enough to provide some investigation publicly and to say that this person, it was like in Ukraine case with football teams. Previously, in order to avoid any responsibilities, corrupt people use 11 people in corporate structures. That's why football teams or 11 Friends of Ocean. And it's like everyone just owns less than 10%. And responsibility started after 10%. They hack the system. System clearly understands that it's a risk factor. The part was decreased till 5%, and it's not so easy to use 21. Not a football team anymore. Okay, then then corruption tried to use another way to violate and to avoid this stuff. So, you know, it's always this play. But for both, for us as to identify this risk factor and for corrupt people to create a new one, it takes time. So at least if we use this risk factor and even provide publicly, we have this time slot as long as they used previous schemes in order to catch someone. Definitely they will change their behavior. Definitely they will create something new, and we have to find this new. So it's like an ongoing process. That's why we're talking about these trend dependencies. I believe that neural nets will be able to retrain themselves very fast. But the problem for the neural nets algorithms that we need millions of data. And not for all countries we have millions of data. We don't have millions of observations. In some we have like 10,000, and it's not enough for using this model. That's why corrupt people have here some opportunity. And yeah, and from second perspective, about publish the code on GitHub, we still also have a discussion in our team because of security issues. It was mentioned by one of Mr. Schneier, who worked with cybersecurity quite a lot, that we also have to secure not only data but also the code and algorithms, because they also can be hacked and they also can be manipulated. And here is the questions. Honestly, I don't have an answer how to save your algorithm right now. Yes, we use 2FA for GitHub and all authentication factors, but still we are not secure to changing the code. That, for instance, the place where our code running is not hacked and all this code is not changing.
You want to say something?
Yeah, so this is precisely the reason why all FAUs, financial intelligence units that I conducted, kindly declined my interview request. So even though I'm not a developer, so I can't really dig into the technicalities of these applications. But what I just wanted to add is that AI transparency registers are gaining momentum, and in the upcoming months and years. And I guess that is a starting point to start disclosing something to increase the accountability, because I mean these tools are also developed in very different manners and using public expenditures and so on. But at the same time, then it could like expose the information of an authority using an automated system, and then it would constitute like the starting point from which maybe like non-disclosure agreements can be based, and further analysis and investigation can be conducted on the basis of the interest and then the mandate of the person asking.
Yeah, I also want to add, I think it's important to differentiate between automating processes and automating decisions. And the part of automating decisions, this is not something that we should just rely on the AI to give it what it is. This is where we always going to need human expert actually revising what is coming out. So from your question, I can actually tell you about what was my experience. In Mexico, we were part of a civic committee that accompanied the financial intelligence unit because they were developing an algorithm to help them detect easily or more quickly cases, and then deciding which investigations to actually take. For us, because it was a security issue, we have to sign a non-disclosure agreement. And because in the end, it was also a security issue if they cannot actually telling us exactly how the algorithm was tuned. They just showed us the main variables considered, the quality of the data, and the type of algorithm that was involved in this kind of process. In the end, I'm telling you this because I think there's ways of being public, even though you have a civic committee where you are actually being open. But this algorithm then, there was a high corruption case in Mexico involving the brother of the president at that time. And then for the next meeting we had with this financial intelligence unit, we asked them if they had used their own algorithm to see if this case was worth investigating. They told us that yes, they had used it and that they saw that there was no risk involved, so that they were not going to proceed with any investigation. I'm telling you this case because I think these technologies are also being used to give a sense of objectivity and unbiasedness. And this is something that we have to start speaking right now, not only about how they're trained and the ethical considerations. I also think the ethical frameworks used for these technologies varies depending on the impact that these technologies have on the data protection issues regarding the people that you're investigating. And if you're doing it from a government, it depends. It varies from having it in academia or civil society or journalists. But definitely, we have to start speaking about this because for each of these uses, I think we have to have civic participation where they are looking into how the algorithms are trained. And even though some of the information is not disclosed, that we know what is actually taken and that we know that our people behind the decisions and what kind of considerations they're using to not say that the algorithm thought that it was not corrupt when in the end it's a political decision just driving the use of these technologies.
Yeah, no, I just want to compliment. I feel that we in the anti-corruption, we are still very excited about the possibilities, and it's not saying that I don't believe it is a very handful tool. It is, but when you look at lessons from policing, face recognition, and policing, or war drones, for example, we see all sorts of abuse. So I think we need to kind of start discussing that more openly and reflect and try to think about solutions together. Otherwise, it's going to be too late, I think.
And gather data about them, produce research, because there's not a lot of empirical evidence on how these tools have been used especially by public authorities regarding how the grassroots use them. Of course, there is more awareness, I guess.
Yes, and actually, like I told you, when you speak with the people developing these technologies that have the money to actually do so, they know that because of the amount of money it requires to train these models, that the new big actor of AI is going to be government. So we as civil society really need to start having these discussions of the ethical frameworks that need to be put in place when government decide to use this technology for anti-corruption purposes. Because I think we're getting out of this conversation where we should be incorporated into the things that we have been seeing to develop these technologies in a more safe manner. But I don't know if anyone else has any questions, inquiries, some cases that you have been doing. We would love to hear from you also.
Hi, I'm Mariel. I'm from the Mexican chapter of Transparency International, and currently we're working on anti-corruption algorithm to detect misuses and misallocations of social programs. And we've been discussing on the ethical measures, including the relevance of documentation, so that we at least know what's in the algorithm. But can you share with us like some practical measures beyond discussing the ethical implications and yeah, like practical measures that we can follow in order to not only to know that the algorithm what's in the algorithm, but to evaluate both the biases and the future implications of this type of technology?
Anyone wants to start?
Well, the tool I told you about the risk of being a straw candidate, it was developed by an office inside the lower chamber, and they had discussions, they selected the data, and then they ran the model, and then they realized, as I said, black females from poor neighborhoods, they were more likely to score high. They basically wrote a report, published a report, being open about that, and they started weighting the variables in a different way. There are softwares that help that. Arequipas is one of them. But in the end, the premise, the variables they selected, and the idea they had of what could be a straw candidate led to that outcome. So why I'm saying that? They scored higher in the beginning students and housemates, as if they are more likely to be straw candidates without an open reflection on that. Those who had funky, weird names in the ballots. Brazil is famous for that, but they use that as a predictor, and it resulted in that. But they open, and they discuss it open, they publish a report, and then they decided to try to do it different. And in the end, they sent the cases to a newsroom to ask for help to check in the ground. So yeah, human validation at a certain point, at least in this beginning, is very, very important. But I think you have more to tell about that, what to do to avoid this.
Honestly, it's hard to say because you need to see the data and to build different algorithms, but here you need to also provide some additional expertise. And just to have someone who can like try to remove your biasness and try to make it more transparent and more open.
And going to your exact case, this is something that we're seeing with Antonina, and that's why I think it's important to have a multidisciplinary team. For example, we are analyzing procurement data with beneficial ownership. And the three of us that are part of the project, each of us has a different set of skills and knowledge that know what to do and how to train the models, because with this kind of data sets, you always have to know what to do with outliers that are going to push you the model. So for example, we know that in certain European countries, you only have to register the beneficial ownership for procurement processes if it goes beyond a quantity. So that helps us to say, okay, all the contracts that we don't have information for beneficial ownership, we're going to take that because that is what the law says of European. So it's not that they're committing a crime because they're not reporting. By law, they don't have to report. So this kind of considerations for the kind of algorithm you have to decide, it's really crucial that you have in your team someone that really knows about the social programs of the data you're training. So this kind of normative considerations are actually considered in the training of the model. And so you know what to do with outliers, because outliers can sometimes be, in our case, very rich people that have a lot of companies on their name, that it's not actually a risk, but what happens in certain countries. In your case, it could be a case that someone is actually reporting in the wrong way to authorities what they did with social programs. So you have to know what to do with this kind of data, because if not, like they say, it creates a bias regarding wrong reporting of certain issues. There were cases that we have where companies, it seemed like we have negative beneficial ownerships, but it was not that. It was just because of the quality of the data for the year that we were measuring, we were having a problem. So if you have a multidisciplinary team that knows very well about the social programs in Mexico, the regulation, the kind of quality data that you're training, and then you have an open discussion about what you decided to put into these algorithms to train, and you are very clear also that probably you're going to see new trends in the data, but you're going to be constantly retraining the model. I think for me that would be an ethical consideration of how to use and speak of them. If you just say that this is the new technology and we're going to be unbiased and actually see all the corruption in programs, social programs, I think that's when the problems start happening.
For instance, when we have international team, as in our case, we have different legislations. So, okay, I'm working more with Ukrainian legislation. Some part we learn a little bit for EU legislation. It definitely have some difference between Ukrainian and EU legislations. And here it was a really good case when we can check on me, for instance, something from EU part, because I'm not biased. Like I'm trying to find like something that match or don't match to this proper legislation, because I don't care. But in contrast with Ukrainian case, and sometimes like different red flags doesn't work. Like Ukrainian red flags may not work for EU or Mexico or Brazil or other countries, but EU red flags also may not work to us. So here is also like someone local and someone outside who can like say, no, here is like, it seems something like biasness.
And I don't want to oversimplify, but there will be trade-offs. And sometimes you need accuracy, you need to reduce accuracy to avoid errors. In the end, it's statistics, there will be errors. But you need to kind of, and then accept. It's said like that, but sometimes the trade-off is reducing accuracy to avoid mistakes.
Actually, with accuracies and mistakes, like with errors, I honestly try to punish myself, like my algorithms like to use in max error, not like something middle, something average, something absolute, like, but try to find the big, like the cases where I provide the biggest harm. And in what percentage, in what level this difference is.
Thank you. The last question I think we could have, if anyone has a last question? If not, then I'm going to pass. If you can give me just closing remarks about how to use AI for anti-corruption for our speakers.
Maybe I can start. First of all, honestly, in my case, I was investigator, and when I start working with some developers, I clearly understand that we have some difference in understanding, and I don't understand how data science works, and he didn't understand what I want to code. So I start learning Python, and I start learning data science in order to do this. However, it doesn't require right now, because it's like easier to find and transform everything to code. But it's crucially, first of all, start and try some small steps. It's okay if your algorithm doesn't work. It's okay if you cannot apply and publish right now all your findings, what you want to do. But at least you will receive valuable insights that why this doesn't work and what you need to change in order to make it workable. So it's okay if you fail in the first step. We have some projects which we haven't published yet, but we have like fourth level of fails, and I hope finally we will find the best solution which will be matched and which provides the less harm to all. So you have to start first, and then you will see how it works and how it moves. Thank you.
We have just 1 minute, so very quick last remarks from the both of you.
Go, Carolina.
So as you said, there are a lot of decisions to make behind these systems, and a lot of actors, a lot of interest, and so I guess that prior implementing them, a careful brainstorming, feasibility study, assessments are essential, as well as also learning by doing. So as she said, like trying to do a little piece and then see what works, what doesn't work, and then adjust. It's a learning by doing process, I guess, really.
I'm going to the basics. For example, Brazil is one case in which the Freedom of Information Act requires machine-readable data. So this was a game-changing, because you can ask for machine-readable data through FOIA. One, invest in clear rules, because then it's easier to kind of train the algorithms. And join me in assessing anti-corruption tools. That's, I would say.
I just want to close to tell you that I think it's important to lose how we get afraid about these technologies, but not the respect that these technologies need. So thank you so much for being here, and hopefully we can meet each other at the halls of this conference. Thanks.
Thank you.